Yeah, that's what we'll be talking about today. Federal government's approval of the National Development Plan from 2021 to 2025. As you've seen there, we've got Mr. Bukar Kyari, who is an economist and former chair of the Nigeria Economic Summit Group. Good morning, and thank you for coming on today.
Good morning.
Well, this plan, I mean, much as I know my guys have talked about several times. Do we have a plan for this country? What is the plan? What is the policy? I was still in the process of planning to plan, but now this, is out there. And so for you, how does that come across?
It's better to have a plan than no plan at all, which actually has been the story of Nigeria since the 80s, because I think the last development plan was somewhere in the neighborhood of 75 to 1980 or thereabouts. Now, planning gives a nation certain things. It prioritizes items that require the attention of government, particularly infrastructure. Now, we've been talking about the lack of proper infrastructure for a long time. And the reason is very simple. When people get elected, whether it's governor or president, they talk about all of these in their manifestos. However, when they come into the office, the day-to-day crisis takes over. And when you don't have a plan, then anything goes. The crisis du jour takes over, and then you end up, running from pillar to post. And then before you know it, you have done your 4 years and it's up. So planning is a critical piece.
With the planning, just as you referenced, is we have had these development plans since 1960 at least.
Correct.
And they always go national development plan from this to this, then another one from this, first national development plan, second national development, down through the ages up until now.
Yeah.
Now, so as you said, it's good to have a plan.
Right.
But to what end is a plan that continues to roll over?
It's always a rollover because a nation is always in existence.
So those are rolling
now,
plan.
They are rolling plan. They're rolling plan. But seriously speaking, yeah, at least in those days when we had the 5-year national development plans, you would see the effect of those plans at the end of the 5 years, whether it is building schools, hospitals, all the secretariats in various states, all the housing estates, all the critical pieces of infrastructure of those days were all built under those national economic development plans.
And durable.
And they also lasted. In fact, in some states, most of the standing infrastructure had been done in those days, and they still continue to stand. But because we lack those, the plan did not continue after, I believe, 80 or 80 something. And therefore, the plan comes from somebody's head, and he executes it, and it's rubbish. Whereas in those days, it is well documented, and people take it very seriously. So it's good to go back to the practice of having national development plans.
Much as it's good, it's good to plan. I mean, that's the right thing to do. But given our own reality here, because this is a plan 2021 to 2025, the government will exit in 2023.
Yes.
And if people look at it from 2015 and probably up until now, they look at the inflation rate, they look at the unemployment rate, they look at the GDP, they look at the youth unemployment, they look at several indices. Those figures have gone south, and that's how those numbers are. So and we know that perhaps when one government leaves and another comes, there isn't any guarantee that they will continue in that same light. So what if, what's the guarantee that, well, if they start off with this plan? Because the question some ask is, why start this plan now when it's just going to be, well, if the next government comes in, it will be 2 years into the plan. The government might say, well, we looked at your figures, your economic figures, for the period with which you were there. They weren't exactly encouraging. So I think I've got a better plan. I don't think I want to stick with this plan. And I jettison this plan. That's a possibility.
Right, and that's the problem with democracy. But the other element is that you can actually make it an aspect of law. If you were to pass a law to make it binding on any new government that comes in place, to continue with the plan.
Ekiti State
With a
is
caveat,
doing that.
with a caveat, exactly. So you enshrine it in the laws of the land, and therefore anybody swearing in to uphold the constitution, etc., would have to abide by that plan. Now, you may end up saying, well, it wasn't my plan, but for the sake of the nation, it's a national plan, therefore I am included in it, and we will execute it. Now, however, I think they did not pay attention to education as I would. So he may end up supplementing it rather than, pushing it aside and come up with a new plan. Guess what? Even if the person were to bring a new plan, it would mirror what had been done anyway. But if you just want to have a room for complementing it or supplementing it or altering it slightly, that should also be enshrined in the law.
I get that point. But, not that I'm trying to poo-poo the plan, but just looking at our present reality.
Right.
We've had different finance ministers or ministers of planning who have said, well, usually, election years are usually nothing really goes on. We can't focus. And that year is part of this plan.
Correct.
So there's definitely going to be what we can refer to as downtime for this particular plan.
So election years in a democracy tend to actually be a year of excesses, in the sense that what happens is, how should I put this without necessarily appearing if I am condoning corruption. But generally speaking, in democracies, towards the election year, the budget would be larger than usual. There would be spending. There would be a lot of activities to show to the electorates that we're doing something, right? And so it becomes expansionary. It may, bring in additional inflationary pressure and so on and so forth, but the economy would be flush with liquidity. That's the case with most democratic systems. So that year becomes the year of the fat years or the fat months or whatever. And in a sense, it's like bribing the electorate. That's what I was trying to...
So essentially, we can say, is that also part of the plan?
It may not necessarily be part of the plan, because the plan would look at the entire 5 year, right? Mm-hmm. And within that 5 year, I would imagine that those people who are actually conceiving that plan are smart people. And because they are smart people, they know that there would be an election year in the process. So
I asked that question because you are an economist. So I'm just trying to look at, because if the question would be, is this a sincere plan? Because if we're looking at it like, okay, this is going to happen.
Right.
Consequently, we're going to factor it at a particular time.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the economic implications for economists and for the nation eventually.
Right.
So that's why I'm asking, so of what essence is a plan that we have that is not sustainable?
Sustainability is one
because
thing.
The question there is, Justice Chamberlain said, one government comes in and another one can say, no, I'm not going with that plan. I'm good. So it speaks to a lack of vision or a coordinated national vision. If every government that comes into office has to have a plan.
Look at it this way. There are some fundamental things we need in the national economy. We have always been, at least for the last 20, 25 years, we've been complaining about lack of basic infrastructure, roads, rail, whatever, all those infrastructural items. We know that the healthcare system, so the healthcare system is horrible. We need it fixed. We need the educational system to be fixed. And of course, the critical piece and catalytic infrastructure, which is electricity, need to be fixed. Now, if you encode those in your national economic development plan, it doesn't matter which party comes in. No matter how left or how right that party is, it would see that that is good for the benefit of all. Mm. Now, execution, plan is plan, right? Mm-hmm. Execution is the most important thing. if I see a national development plan of a country, and 5 years later you look back and see that only 20% of those elements within that plan had been done, that is a poor execution. The plan may be good, but the execution was horrible.
Shouldn't we then be asking questions around that?
Right.
The ERGP has elapsed.
Exactly.
For instance, what's your assessment of its performance?
My own personal assessment of ERGP is that it wasn't executed well. It hasn't. And the reason is very simple. I think there were some assumptions that were made in the ERGP, and those assumptions had changed. You know, price of oil, production of oil, the GDP growth, all of those. Now, when you make certain assumptions and things change, you need to go back to the drawing board and modify your plan, so to speak, because things are not the same as you conceived.
These are, it's, the ERGP is not just alphabet. Economic recovery and growth didn't go as planned. Now, we have a national development plan.
Yeah.
It would seem that those kind of plans don't go as well as borrowing plans.
No. So economic recovery plan was necessitated by an event. And that event was the 2016 recession. So it is to recover from that recession that the ERGP came about. Now, I know when it was conceived. It was at a summit where I was chairing, and we, together, both the private and public sector, but primarily the public sector, came up with this plan, and the execution were based on certain assumptions. Now, that's history, right? Whereas national development plans, the way I understood it, is a rolling plan in any country. China, for example, has been doing it for close to 80 or so years. I think it's over 60 years now. China has been doing, I think theirs is 6 or 7 year plan. And they consistently do it. Now, earlier on, the implementation or execution of their plans were poor. But as they continuously did it, they begin to improve on how best to do the execution.
And we saw
and that resulted in the change in living conditions of the citizens.
Exactly. We've seen that over the years.
And,
can we say the same for our clients?
And that is what that's what my hope is. I mean, I'm going to be a hopeful human being. As bad as things are in Nigeria, I still believe that there is a trigger somewhere that would make us start to do the right things. And how and when would be a question for everyone.
Yeah. How come borrowing plans seem to go, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
How come some, borrowing plans seem to go easier? The federal government has just received approval to go borrowing again, which is further pushing up our debt burden, and which even agencies, ministries, departments, and agencies are already been a little cautious. What's your assessment of that one?
The debt issue is a major subject for the country to seriously look at. I think what we need to look at is how much debt do we owe, and we need to also dissect the debts into external versus internal. Talking as a layperson, let me put it this way. The domestic borrowing can be easily handled, right? But the external borrowing is where the real issue is. As a percentage of GDP, it's low. So when you are borrowing externally, you have to look at two things. Is it sustainable, as you put it? The key for Nigeria is not just the borrowing, but any time you borrow, you make sure that your revenues have gone up to be in a position to service the debt well. So debt to GDP ratio is around 30-something percent, 32 or 33%. But
not 70.
No, debt to GDP is still low compared to most highly indebted countries. But debt to export earnings is still decent, because our export earnings is around 20 or 30 billion dollars a year. Now, the debt service to exports, but debt service to revenue of government is abysmally low. That's where the 70% or 60% come in. Now, that's the reason why people are saying it's not sustainable. Now, when you look at our revenue generation compared to our GDP, it's at 5%. So if you look at the entire sub-Saharan Africa, the revenue generation to GDP is around 20% for the entire sub-Saharan Africa and 30% for sub-Saharan African countries that export oil, like Angola and the rest of them. So what that means is that Nigeria needs to generate 4x or 6x of the revenue it's generating right now. If our revenue generation were let's say 5x of what it is now, that debt service will not be a burden.
So now, if you juxtapose the development plan with the debt burden that we already have now, what are we looking at?
So if you have a development plan, the development plan, if it is well written and well conceived, it includes the sources of financing that plan.
And the financing,
in the financing, debt will come in addition to foreign FDIs, foreign direct investments. So you have to have an easier economic environment for investors to come in. Investors shouldn't be frightened of coming into Nigeria. Right now, as things are going, over time, they may be scared. They may go to a less riskier country than us.
Well, the figures already show that they've been frightened for decades. Because if you look at what we do compared to India, which was referenced several times, I mean, we used to be a power India some decades ago, but now India is doing over 120 or 60.
Right.
We are doing 2 billion.
Yes.
2 billion.
Yes.
So look at that. That tells you so much about the
Even
fight.
from just 10 years ago, our numbers are, I think we were doing about 20 or 30 billion a year in FDIs.
And now,
I remember,
years back.
A few days ago, Chamberlain was quoting that, referencing the sources of generating some of these revenues as the private sector. Right. So I'm at a loss.
Yeah.
So if the private sector is one of the sources of revenue generation for the federal government, and this same private sector is stifled, the business environment is stifled, and MSMEs cannot survive 5 years based on all of the regulatory apparatus and some of the issues, soft and hard infrastructure that you talked about the other time. Where then is government going to get the money from?
So here are some of the elements that I'm looking at. I mean, I haven't seen the plan yet.
No, but they say 85% of that fund of 348.7 trillion will come from private sector.
Exactly, and I hope that they would also consider selling their dead assets. The federal government and indeed the subnationals as well have somewhere in the neighborhood of, I think according to PwC, somewhere in the neighborhood of $600 to $900 billion of dead assets. These are assets that are not generating any revenues for them. Now, if you can...
That's for the federal government.
That's the federal government. Now, if they can offload even half of that, even at a fire sale, there is Christmas promo coming by 2 for 1, whatever, and you can inject so much capital into the development plan such that, if well executed, we can end up forgetting about even the debt burden that we have. Can you imagine? And giving the federal government another $100 or $200 billion. I don't know what your thinking is about, but then again, we can either go into town.
Do these dead assets include some 12,000 or 16,000 abandoned buildings or abandoned projects of the federal government?
Exactly. There are factories. There are elements of buildings that belong to, say, the power holding company, et cetera, et cetera. There are many assets that actually sit idle, generating practically nothing in terms of revenue or value to government that they can offload.
Well, one of the key questions we always like to ask governments or whichever, at whatever point is, how do they hope to achieve all of these plans and boost the private sector or the economy without addressing the power challenge? How do they want to do that?
The fundamental thing is to have policy that is friendly. The private sector has means of attracting capital, whether it's foreign or domestic. And I would hate to see huge borrowings from the part of the private sector to invest. They should rather actually partner with, entities or firms outside that do have the capital and the know-how in executing whatever that is needed. Because generally speaking, private sector has the creative endeavor and innovative flair that they can apply in getting the necessary resources in executing.
Encouraging
Can
them
I talk
to
about
get
the leakages?
Blocking the leakages.
So,
it's a very important one.
We've never even looked at that area
Yes.
alone because,
Yeah.
I mean, the leakages, goodness me, they are huge.
Right.
And so if they were to take some serious consideration of those areas, and then what happens to the unspent budgetary funds year on year? We don't seem to hear a lot about all of those. So, and then his favorite part, the Auditor General's report.
That's a major leakage.
The Auditor General generally looks for those things anyway, because that's his job, right?
Well, yes, but so what does it do with them? You go to the National Assembly, you were talking about laws and policies all the
Correct.
time. It would seem like the laws and policies to checkmate those things are weak or not or not
Or
used at all.
in existence, yes. So the Auditor General reports to another arm of government to say that you have the oversight, and here are what I have seen, and do something about it, because he doesn't have the power, because it's the people that hired him that he is policing. So the only recourse for him is to go to the National Assembly, which means he's doing his job.
Well, it's good to have plans, but there are some realistic things that need to be addressed if those plans are to see the light of day. And those are not exactly rocket science.
Right.
There's several persons and several people who are very, very capable in this country to ensure that those things, in fact, they can take us way beyond where we are now.
Right.
And without even looking at security. Capital is a coward.
Capital is a coward.
If
It runs out.
when it's ready.
Yes.
So if it's not secure, you can say all you
Runs
want
away.
about the plan, it won't go anywhere. But of course, we're hopeful that some of these things can work. Even the hope is not a strategy. But we always thank you. Always a pleasure to have you on.
Pleasure is all mine. Thank you.
All right, we're back in a moment. Don't go away.
Indeed, that's the matter we're sinking our teeth into. Just right on the same program yesterday, we had asked the police if indeed an investigation was going on to let us see the suspect. And it would seem that the police, either they were listening or they already had it planned, eventually went to that plan. And that was what we saw yesterday, including a very comprehensive statement which they released to journalists. But we have with us this morning Mr. Isaac Aromudu, who is a legal practitioner, to help us dissect and make sense of some of what was revealed yesterday by the police. You're welcome to Sunrise Daily, sir.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I don't know what your initial impressions were. First, when you heard that, because the police did say before now that they were investigating the matter, that they will soon come out with findings. And then eventually, they did come out with findings, parading 14 suspects. They say 7 of them are still at large, including soldiers, genuine soldiers, and also members of some other government agencies whom they're still trying to get. What did you make of the statement as released by the police and also the testimony of the suspects?
Thank you very much, Mwakwe. And my starting point is to commend the police to have at least started investigation on this matter, started arresting people, as we can see already. Because if you recall, Mwakwe, sometime in 2016, when there was a so-called sting operation against judges of the Supreme Court and Federal High Court judges and other superior courts, I was in this studio calling strenuously for the arrest of the EFCC and DSS officials that carried out that so-called sting operation, because it was totally illegal and uncalled for. And eventually, all the 8 judges were discharged and acquitted, showing that there was no merit ab initio in that so-called operation. So if that call I made had been heeded to, and there were arrests like this, and sanctions were meted out, perhaps there would have been no repeat. So I'm very happy that the police is now taking steps to get to the root of this matter. But while we commend the steps so far, that is not enough. In fact, what happened yesterday and the exposition by the police yesterday and the statements made by some suspects has even opened up the more reason why a more meticulous investigation should be done. Because it then suggests that there is a big masquerade behind all this charade. If the spokesperson of the police, CP Frank Mba, said that these guys attempted to bring the EFCC into it, if he is telling us that there are some military personnel already at large, we do not know whether they have the Nigerian Army, Navy, Air Force, whether they have the DMI, the DIA, the whatever, DSS. So it tells you the extent to which the cartel went to execute this. No wonder someone like Governor Wike is suspecting that this was an assassination attempt. It could have been put under any guise. Therefore, it's beyond these 14 people now arrested. And by the way, the names given to us yesterday, that of Lawrence Ajodo, had already been in the public domain. I've already got that name since last 1 week or more. The name of Aliyu Umar Ibrahim, the Islamic preacher who made himself a whistleblower and brought the initial affidavit that led to all this, has been in the public domain. The name of the magistrate, Emmanuel Inyana, has been in the public domain. We want to get to the root. The hidden masquerades, the people behind all this, they must be fished out no matter how highly placed and drastically punished.
You suspect that there are hidden masquerades behind this?
Oh, yes, certainly. Because for them to be intent on bringing in military personnel to give an official cover, for them to be intent on bringing in the EFCC to give an official cover, suggests that they were highly determined. And then it means that we are yet to know the real motive. That is why the investigation needs to be more scrupulous than what we are seeing now. I'm happy that they've started. It's better to be late than never. And it's a good thing, because if the police had been going along this line before, things like this would have been nipped in the bud and we won't be where we are now.
But he says they're loose cannons. That's the statement. It looks like they're just a ring operating on their own, very much like any other criminal cartel that you'll have.
That's not what it tells me, because the house they went to is the house of the next most senior justice of the Supreme Court. The house they went to is not the house of a judge we don't know. This woman has been in the judiciary for years. There has been no anything scandalous, anything messy connected to her name. Her reputation she had managed to keep intact up to now. Even all the previous incidences when allegations were made, arrests were made, whether true or false, her name had never been mentioned. So there was no reasonable justification for anybody to want to do that. And if you remember, they had affidavits.
What I'm saying is, if they were if they are a criminal cartel, what other justifications do they need than, say, maybe monetary inducement, perhaps the promise that there will be money to be made at the end of this? Criminal cartels do not care who you are. They would aim for whoever it is they can get.
That's exactly why it's important to find out who hired this criminal cartel and for what, considering the caliber of the person involved, considering the territory. This is Minister's Hill, my timer. By just the location alone, there's a presumption of responsibility and high profile of the persons that live there. If you remember, there was also a deliberate attempt to mask the identity of the house. The house was supposed to be number 7 Imo River Street.
Number 9.
Number 9 Imo River Street. The search warrant was for number 9 Imo Street. So there was a deliberate decoy. And yet, despite the search warrant being for number 9 Imo Street, you went to number 9 Imo River Street and laid siege and remained there and was intent on remaining there until senior lawyers like Justice Wike, who happened to, Governor Wike, who happened to be in Abuja coincidentally on that evening for the PDP issue, and some senior lawyers like, my learned senior friend, Chief Chris Uche, and others began to go there. That was when, Ezekome and so on, that was when the so-called siege was called off. And if you see that the magistrate who purportedly issued the search warrant was said to have revoked the search warrant that same day on a weekend in the evening by 7:30 p.m. So the question is, at which court did that magistrate sit? to revoke the court order? Who was his court clerk? Who was the court registrar who typed the order? Am I communicating? So you see the kind of heinous, well-calculated incongruity that shows that there is a high-profile personality intent on harassing this innocent woman. And when you look at the fact that we are talking about a woman here, every society that had made progress had been societies that have given due respect and courtesy to their women folk. And when we are seen as people who can treat a mother, a wife, a Supreme Court judge of that caliber in this manner, how do you think foreign investors will look at this country to want to come and put their money? So it has both political, economic, social, and all manner of consequences.
It has indeed deep implications. Because the police has said that, in this instance, it was seen that they were on their own. I mean, that's the insinuation that one can get from what the CP was saying. However, when you listen very carefully, and when you look at the caliber of people who, yes, a number of them, we cannot say what profession they belong to, but a few of them, some of them are genuine lawyers. They're real lawyers. One of them is alleged to be a journalist. And if a quick check of his name would actually say that at some point he had been employed by a reputable media organization. So there are huge questions as to what precisely went down. If indeed, this caliber of people can just be put together told that they were just loose cannon. There are very, very big questions as to what exactly can anybody just be subject of this? We could hear tomorrow now that perhaps this set of people are investigating somebody else high up there. You don't think so?
No. That seems to give more credence to Governor Wike's allegations that, number one, it might have been an assassination attempt. Number two, it may have been an attempt to intimidate the judiciary as a whole and Justice Mary Odili in particular. So, and if that is so, it's very serious for the polity. Like you said, you could see allegations that the CSP is fake. I've seen his ID card. There's nothing fake about that ID card. I've seen the person who signed the ID.
You've seen it close up?
I've seen it close up. It doesn't look fake.
Were you there yesterday at the parade?
No, I wasn't there. I've seen it even a week before. That's why I said all those informations we saw yesterday are not new. They're already in the public domain. And that ID card was signed by a highly placed person.
Do you think that he's been denied or disowned by the police?
It's all possibility. That is why I support the stand of the MBA and the body of senior advocates, Bosan, that the president should constitute an independent inquiry. It is not an investigation that should be left to the police alone, considering that the police is, by extension, an arm of the executive. And that is why on these matters of independence of other arms of the judiciary, legislative, persons like us have been stringently calling for the enforcement of the principle of separation of powers. The Section 308 of the Constitution should be amended to either accord the same immunity to the heads of the legislature and the executive and the judiciary as is being enjoyed by the executive, or that Section 308 should be scrapped completely so that there is no immunity for any of the three arms and they are all equal. That is what will put an end to this air of executive rascality we are seeing in this country.
The testimony of the lead suspect, the alleged CSP Ajodo, it was a bit troubling. You hear him even in his testimony to the press, saying that he's a consultant. He had been doing jobs before now for the AGF. The AGF has come up very strongly to deny and to say that they have absolutely no link whatsoever with him. They dissociate themselves in very strong, I'm trying to see if I can find that statement now, very strong terms from this alleged CSP, so to speak. But then there are deeper questions. Because before now, we did know that there was also an asset recovery, will I say desk or so, and it was found out that the person who was heading it for many months or for almost a year plus or a few years was actually a fake lawyer. We were parading a fake certificate, and he was right in the heart of the people, or right at the heart of a program that was supposed to be an asset recovery program. And there are huge questions as to whether we really do have a database, to be able to certify people at every point in time, to say that these people are genuine people. I don't know what you made of that controversy, and how do you think that it can be resolved? Because right now, it is the word of the suspect against the word of the AGF.
Mark, but you're very correct about these serious concerns you have raised. This fellow was arresting people, senators, very highly placed persons, recovering assets.
You know the person I'm talking about?
Oh, yes. And only for it to be eventually proven that he had no certificate. He was a fake lawyer. He was even arresting lawyers and was parading himself all over the place. So that raises a very serious integrity question. And that is the kind of question that has been reinforced now by the very confident, courageous assertions of the prime suspect here. I watched him on interview yesterday. He wasn't sounding like somebody who was afraid of what he was saying, of the veracity of what he was saying. He was sounding like someone behind whom there appeared to be some measure of authenticity as to his claims. He was even saying that he had been now in that asset recovery panel for over a year and has been recovering assets for that office. So it's not a claim that can be easily dismissed. Even though the Constitution gives presumption of innocence and allegations must be proved, that again brings us to why there should be an independent investigation. Because, like I said, the police, I'm not discrediting the police. They've done a fine job so far. And under the present IG of police, you can see a whole lot of good things the police are doing. Frank Mba has also been doing very well. But this particular matter, to the extent that police is still part of the executive, and the executive is the arm being fingered, there should be an independent inquiry. And that all, again, now brings us to the solutions I was trying to say. Having called for the solution of amendment of Section 308, there is also the issue of amending the Constitution further to separate the role of the Minister of Justice and the Attorney General of the Federation. Because right now, those two offices are in one person. And the Minister of Justice is supposed to be the lawyer for the executive arm. If you have an issue with any minister or any arm of the executive, that office of the Minister of Justice automatically represents the executive. And the Section 36 of the Constitution contemplates situations where there will be legal controversies between institutions or individuals and the government.
In all fairness to the minister, though, that's the Attorney General of the Federation, the suspect did say that he was not asked to undertake this particular job. He was not given this particular job. He seemed to be acting alone. If we take his words that indeed he had been consulting before now, why shouldn't we take his words that he was on his own on this particular assignment?
Even if he was on his own, don't forget, we're not saying that he was or must have been working for the Attorney General at this particular instance. The only thing that we are insisting is that whoever he was working for must be unmasked. Otherwise, there will be a possible repeat scenario. Considering that we're in 2021, getting to 2022, preparatory to 2023 election. If you recall, immediately after the 2015 election, there was this sting operation targeting at some judges, even some of whom we knew, like Justice Dean, like Justice Okoro.
Nobody denied that particular.
Yes.
The DSS owned that particular operation, and there were questions and there were criticisms.
Yes.
Yes.
Now, by 2018,
yes,
when Justice Onogen was to become Chief Judge,
yes,
as the retirement of Mukhtar was approaching, there was an operation in Justice Onogen's home, and a raid, unauthorized. And by the time we screamed Blue Mother, the DSS of police came out to apologize. Oh, sorry, we are looking for something. We made a mistake. We got there just because they didn't find anything incriminating. But yet, soon after, Justice Onogen was made the Chief Judge, and some persons were not comfortable with his upright stand. An expert order appeared from nowhere. A place quasi-judicial, an inferior entity like the Code of Conduct Tribunal, and the man was yanked off. So that kind of scenario repeating again should get us worried. And if you recall that this is a democracy, this is not a military government. All the years of military government in this country, I've been 30-something years in this profession, there was no raid on judges during the military era. So if the military, as dictatorial and arbitrary as they could be, never raided judges, they had respect for the sanctity of the judiciary, how come we're experiencing that in a so-called democracy? So if judges are being raided by pattern, whatever is the motive, whoever is behind this must be clearly unmasked and clear sanctions imposed to serve as deterrent. Otherwise, I promise you, Makwe, this will repeat again, but perhaps in a more deadly dimension.
So, but the difference between the instance, and I'm not dismissing the instances, because the instances which you have, brought to the fore now is what has laid the foundation for this particular siege, whether, fake or genuine. It is what has given the impetus to this, sets of suspected criminals to be able to want to carry this out, because they've seen it happen in so-called genuine cases. At least that time, the authorities did not wash their hands of it. They owned it and they defended it. However, false the defense might seem. That said, this is what we are now currently saying. When this happened, the EFCC immediately washed their hands of it. They said, oh, somebody's trying to set us against the judiciary. The DSS said they know absolutely nothing about it, and the police said they were going to investigate. And this is what we are now getting. There are huge questions as to the impetus that any individual really get up and say, look, I want to set up a criminal cartel. And what we'll be doing is getting affidavits, genuine affidavits, getting a genuine magistrate to go to the homes of highly placed people to go and search their homes. There are really huge questions for the implications of what the police is saying, that, a criminal cartel, if indeed they were a criminal cartel, does exist like this.
Exactly. And that is why this investigation must get to the root. For instance, CP Frankenbach has told us that some of the 7 persons still being sought for are persons working with known security agencies.
Indeed.
Some are military personnel. Therefore, the different military entities should release them for proper investigation. And their identities should be unmasked. That is when we will be sure that this is even just a criminal entity at work.
Should we be focusing on the individuals that are being hired? Because some people will say that, do you just go and ask a policeman or a security or a military man to, oh, come and join me on this? Isn't it their bosses
exactly
that they speak to to be able to release these people?
That is why you see me calling for an independent investigation. It is not something that should be left for the police alone. What if some of these persons are genuine police officers? The police will have a duty to protect its reputation. What if those persons are highly placed persons and others were given by highly placed persons in sister security agencies? The spirit of esprit, the issue of esprit de corps will arise at some point. But if we have an ombudsman, that was why you see me calling for this amendment of the Constitution. This issue of separating the office of the AGF and that of the Minister of Justice. Because while the minister would have been for the executive, the office of the Attorney General Federation would have been for the Nigerian masses, the Nigerian people. That is the office that would have independently taken over. An ombudsman would have been appointed, just like what happened in the Ken Starr case in America when the President Clinton was involved, the head of the executive. Yet there was an independent person who could investigate anybody with unlimited powers. That's what we need now to put an end to these misadventures.
It's really very troubling indeed. We'll see how matters eventually proceed, because the police has done the initial parade. I don't know what you expect. Yes, you've made the call right now that there should be an independent investigation. However, while we wait for that to happen, these people are currently in the custody of the Nigerian police force. They have released a comprehensive statement to that effect, telling the story of how come these people are in their custody. It is we'll wait to see whether the investigation which you call for, will be heeded by the executive arm of government. But assuming that is not done, what should become of the suspect?
It will be dangerous if the executive does not heed this call now. If you recall, Makwe, when I was in this station in 2016, I called for the arrest of the DSS officers and EFC officials that went on that raid, because it was not only illegal, it contravened the Constitution, the NJC was not consulted, and there were no prima facie case established against any of the judges. And like I rightly said, each of those 8 judges were roundly discharged. In fact, one of them was Justice Okoro, who died recently of the Supreme Court. And it took 8 months for the Ebonyi state government to build a house for him before he could be buried. That means that man was totally incorruptible. He had no home. He had no enough money to even build a house of his own, a Supreme Court judge. Yet, that was the one that was being arrested on charges of so-called corruption. So we knew that all that whole thing was a charade. And we called for the arrest and thorough investigation as to the mastermind. If that was done in 2016, this wouldn't have happened now. And if this continues happening, it erodes the confidence of the citizenry on the judiciary. We lawyers suffer. Everybody suffer. So I hope that we don't get some lawyers who will come on, start defending this kind of misadventure and, national atrocity, because it damages our profession. During the military era, even though there were no registers on judges, because people lost confidence in the judiciary, people were going to army barracks to hire majors and brigadiers to go and enforce their rights with other people where there were issues about struggle for property and land and so on. So if they were doing it then, when there were no rates on judges, now if you continue to have rates and people lose confidence in the judiciary, there will be resort to anarchy and self-help. That is the danger for us here. And for outside investors, foreign investors, who are looking at us as a lawless entity, nobody will bring his money and investment into a lawless society where there is no rule of law. And where also the person involved is a woman, a mother, somebody's wife, and there's no that sensibility in us as to make us civilized people. Others would back off. So we're going to lose a whole lot. That is why this call for independent investment must be heeded by the executive. Otherwise, it will be seen that there's a cover-up. It will be seen that someone in the executive high up is behind this whole operation. And that will affect the issue of separation of powers, the harmony that should exist between all the arms of government and the confidence the citizens will have on the judiciary.
While we wait for that, excuse me, while we wait for that to happen, what should happen to the suspect? I mean, today, for instance, what should be happening to them?
Yeah, what should be happening is that the police should be quick because of the constitutional requirement for trial, period. They should be quick in getting at these persons. We've seen examples that when our security agencies are ready to work, they can work. When Rambo did what he did in Nigeria and flew to Benin Republic, because it had to do with Obasanjo's grandchildren, Rambo was fished out within 48 hours. When Mena did what he did and ran out of the country, Mena was brought in by Interpol in no distant time. We have seen, persons of high profile arrested. If someone like Nnamdi Kanu can be, tracked by this government, what is the difficulty in getting criminals that are within? So they should be gotten within 24 hours. There must be some kind of drastic expedition. There must be some kind of speed that shows that the government is serious. I saw CP Frank Mba rightly calling this a very serious offense. And I saw him use that word. And he's a lawyer, he knows the implication. So I expect that to be the mood of the police, that mood of radicality that gives Nigerians quick answer. In developed countries, when you commit a crime, within 24 hours, the police are able to give you the name, the address, even the picture of everybody and the role they played. Our police has that capacity. If you see it and they've gone for foreign missions, our police have always come out the best. They have the capacity if they're willing to do the job, and that's what we want them to do right now.
Well, we'll wait for them, to see how this investigation proceeds and whether or not there will be the establishment of an independent investigation. But we have to thank you so much for coming to share your thoughts this morning. Mr. Isaac Anumodu is a legal practitioner, and we've been speaking on the siege to the home of Supreme Court Justice Mary Odili. Sunrise Daily will continue in a moment. Please stay with us.
Welcome back. Well, yes, we'll be talking about that and sundry matters. We've got Margaret Oguntala, who is an engineer. She's also a fellow, Nigerian Society of Engineers, Nigerian Institution of Environmental Engineers, Nigerian Society of Chemical Engineers, and Nigerian Institute, that's the Institute of Management Consultants. It's still the Nigerian one, so it all works. Good morning. Thank you for coming on today.
Good morning.
Well, yes, and looking at that unfortunate scenario, yes, it raises concern. Yeah. But when you sit back and look at the whole matter, you tend to wonder, is it the kind of concern, that makes sure or sees real steps taken to ensure that this kind of things don't happen again? Because it's not the first. The last time it happened, many thought, okay, well, hopefully that won't happen again before this one. So how does that come across to you?
Well, first I must say that this is a very unfortunate thing to happen. One would think that by now, things like this would not be happening in Nigeria, particularly because of the kind of competent engineers that we do have. However, I guess the reason why it keeps happening is, normally when investigations are done, to ascertain the cause, immediate and remote causes of this kind of collapse, it's expected that the recommendations will be adhered to, arising from the investigation. And if the citizens and the people concerned, everybody concerned, actually takes takes the advice of the professionals who have carried out the investigations, then it will not be happening. So I think the reason why it continues to happen is that people continue to flout rules.
And who are these people that continue to flout rules?
Okay, we have, for instance, this particular structure was being done by a developer. I mean, I'm sure most of us are developers. You have your own house, so you are a developer, but you should engage professionals. And then where things are not done properly, it could be from the soil, it could be from the structural design, it could be from materials, bad materials and such. So everybody who does who takes on any kind of project is somebody who is responsible. Is responsible to is responsible to the extent of ensuring that this kind of thing doesn't happen.
But how does the narrative of developers flouting the advice of developers, of engineers come in? Because one would have thought that the engineers are supposed to protect the developer even against his own instincts.
Sure. Well, sometimes, to start with, it is not even all the time that the developers use professionals. Now, in instances where they do, some of them really still don't listen. For instance, in this particular matter, I mean, there are stories, and I think it's been confirmed, that the structural engineer resigned at some point, because he was not happy with what was going on, because the developer was not adhering or taking to his advice. He's the one who has the money. And a number of times we have had cases where the structural engineer will recommend a particular material, and then the developer will say, somebody told me that I can use something less and it will give me the same result.
In terms of following the rules, do you think that if that story that you said is correct, as some have said it is, do you think that fellow, the structural engineer or consultant, whatever, followed the rules?
I think he did. Because if you got a job you have a client who is not listening to you, then what you should do is to resign.
But one of the things that we also heard is that when you do that, you ought to speak to the state government, at least to the authorities, to ensure that that is done.
Well, that's what is supposed to be done. But we also know the reality of the human behavior. The first instinct of every human being is to protect himself. And when you are dealing with people who have people in high places, you also try to be careful. A lot of things happen in Nigeria now and all over the world. So people one would think that the man would feel, well, even though this is what I'm supposed to do, report to the state government, I also think I should protect myself. That's my view.
So what makes them professionals then?
Well, what makes him a professional is that he resigned and he made it public. And you will see that on the board, at least from what we have seen, the name and the phone number of the structural engineer were actually removed and cancelled. That means he was no longer officially on that job. And that's, sure. I think...
I ask that because, if they're professionals and their ethics, their rules, it doesn't matter what anybody thinks. It doesn't matter what whoever Godfather thinks. The profession is the profession. The profession should not be subservient to the whims and caprices of the Godfather, whoever is in a high place. Isn't that what it's supposed to be?
Well, that's what it's supposed to be, theoretically, really. But you and I know that in the end, the survival instinct really comes forth in this kind of situation. And I think, essentially, the first thing that the professional needs to do is what that guy has done. He resigned.
But the question about that resignation is, did they follow the standard procedure? Because, they say, even though there's a panel independent on to look at that and come up with their recommendation, as it should be. But the thing is, if one claims they resigned and the processes and steps are not adhered to, can it be considered, can it be deemed as resignation?
Well, if the investigations show that the processes were not were not followed, due process was not followed, then maybe.
Do you
But
know
until we know that for sure, really, I think that it will suffice that the man actually felt that what was going on. And I'm sure that before he even resigned, he must have had series of meetings with the clients.
Well, we don't know that. Do you know the person, for instance, the company?
I didn't. That's why I said he must have. And that's why we all agree that if eventually it is discovered that he did resign and he followed the due process. The due process is somebody employs you. If you are employed if you have an employer who's not doing what you expect of him, you give him advice and he doesn't take to your advice, what you do, you resign. So that's the basic thing to do.
Well, clearly, this is not only within the industry, building and construction industry. It also involves government.
Sure.
But in the building and construction industry, there are professionals, both in the private sector and in the government side. It then raises a lot of questions about how professional the professionals themselves have been, both within government and on the sites. What are they think? What can you say about that? Because there are those who are also raising questions as to the people who are officials of government. Some of them are also members of some of these institutions, you know, that you are a fellow of.
Sure.
Some of them good engineers, as you have said, professionals like yourself. So one wonders if there is supposed to be monitoring, there's supposed to be due process and all those things. 2 of the 3 buildings are standing, 1 of them is down. At what point did we drop the ball, so to speak, to the extent that this happened and there are loss of lives?
Yes, I think there are some gaps really in the monitoring. I will say that there must have been gaps because you see there's a lot that goes into this kind of thing. But again, until investigations are fully carried out, one can't say exactly what happened.
Correct.
So for now, I would think that we should just wait. Let's carry out the proper investigation. Just 2 days ago, the Council for the Regulation of Engineering in Nigeria set up an inquiry, which consists of members of all the environment, the built environment, architects, structural engineers, and consultants, and all of them. And it is expected that at the end of the inquiry, some of these questions that we ask now will be answered.
Okay.
And then we'll be able to know exactly. So that's
well,
my
yeah,
take.
a number of professionals such as yourself who we have had to interface with on this issue have raised the issue of compromise of materials, saying that some 12 mm has become 10 mm and all of that. So I'm wondering, what's the role of the profession, the experts in the profession, in ensuring the standards? If, for instance, the Standards Organization of Nigeria is not, playing its role, what's the role of the professionals?
The role of the profession is actually to maintain standards, of materials used at
But the
at
standards
every
been
site.
compromised.
We are not so sure now. That's why I said, look, for now, I think we should just wait because those are speculations. I mean, nobody has gone to check all of that. As a matter of fact, Koren is now not even looking at just the collapsed building. The Koren has ordered that integrity tests be done on even the standing structures, just to be sure that, that kind of thing is not going to happen to any one of them. So I think we all should just wait a bit. We should just tarry a bit in our conclusions and let's see what comes out. And then I'm sure it's very soon we'll all find out what happened. After all, when we have when there's plane crash, they will tell you until they find the black box. They wouldn't know what happened, and they would not tell you anything until they find the black box. So I think in this situation too, we all just need to be a bit more patient.
Do you think we have enough confidence in Nigerian society of engineers, for instance, as a country?
Well, it depends on how you look at it. I think I'm an engineer, but as a country, I believe that we do have a lot of confidence in the Nigerian engineer.
No,
However,
what do they do in this kind of scenario? The NSC.
The NSC is the current that I said that has formed that's just constituted the inquiry is a regulatory body made of engineers. So that's the role of the engineers in this. And the Nigerian set of engineers, the president just last week, was on air to also discuss the fact, our role and what we're doing to ensure that we get to the bottom of this matter and we make recommendations that will ensure that this kind of thing does not happen anymore.
Because, I mean, when prevention, of course, is always better
Sure.
than this kind of scenario.
Exactly.
So one wonders, what did they do when all of those buildings are going up? Because we've seen them in different states, and that's why the question arises. So when they come up with all of this recommendation, what's the assurance that at the end of the day, they will step up their actions and perhaps do a lot more in prevention as opposed to just doing this afterwards?
Well, what we do in prevention is that our members really, wherever they find themselves, and I think it could be one of the reasons why the structural engineer felt, look, I'm out of here. You know, so what we do is to ensure, we have what we call the Engineering Regulation and Monitoring of COREN. And we go to sites, you know, and especially there are times when we even get information, you know, maybe anonymous sometimes, you know, because people also are being careful. And then we go to such sites, we visit, we do inspection, and then we ensure that the rules are being followed.
Did you get anyone about this?
We didn't get any of this. We did not. So
what
that.
What about when the letter was circulating? When he was said to have resigned?
The letter did not come to us. It did not come to COREN.
So no member of COREN got any idea
COREN
of
as
what
a
was
council
going on?
did not. So I wouldn't know if any member got, but COREN as I'm a member of the council.
Would you have expected the structural engineer that you said resigned, for instance? Would you have expected that kind of person to maybe bring that case to the industry?
Maybe he should, you know, because he will be protected, you know. But you know, it's all like I said. Everything is still in the speculation stage right now. So just maybe he should.
Yeah. Well, you understand. You're vying to become president of NSC, for instance. Is this how this is going to be moving forward? What's going to change? Why do you even want to lead the NSC? Well,
you know, to start with, I'll tell you that I'm actually vying, but I'm not expected to. Our ethics don't allow campaign. So
no, it's not campaign. Just was wondering what drives the NSC,
okay,
what they do,
and what
the leadership does.
What difference you think I can make?
Because now people are asking, so what's the point of NSC if they're there and buildings are collapsing?
Well, the buildings are collapsing not due to the negligence of NSC, really, I would say. NSC on its part does, we have the objectives of the Nigerian Society of Engineers, and they are basically to see to the professional development of the members, see to the welfare of the members, and also act as an advisory body to the government. Now, all of these, the Nigerian Society of Engineers does. But I'll also say something. And I think Chief Olusegun Obasanjo just said it at some point. He said, you are my special advisor, but you can advise me, but I don't have to take your advice. You know, that kind of thing. So the Nigerian Society of Engineers, on its part, does a lot of advocacy, talking to government, engaging government from time to time. And I think, on my part, I think we could do more of that, you know, and then to engage government more, you know, to be, so that right now, you see that engineers most of the time are not, or a lot of times, are not part of the policy making, you know. Engineers are at the end, you know, at the implementation. Engineers are expected to implement policies that have been made by politicians. So we need government to involve engineers more in making policies. Some of these rules that govern the state, if we were just more involved. For instance, in 2015, the Nigerian Society of Engineers came up with what we call the Infrastructure Scorecard. The scorecard was to show the deficit in the infrastructure of the country, to show how many, what are the deficits that we have, road infrastructure, the power sector, and all of that. And then with that kind of scorecard, if government could just use it, and that's what is being done in most other parts of the globe. The engineers are relied upon to come up with such things to help government, even in the budgetary allocations.
Okay. Does NSC or even COREN have any form of disciplinary measures where we have engineers who don't live up to par? Because I'm wondering if there was significant deterrence for, as you said, the executors of plans the engineers, I don't think any one of them would risk losing their operating license.
Sure. There are policies, there are punishments, as so to speak.
Do you think they are strong enough
They
for
are.
deterrence?
Actually, in the past, Koren did not have the power to prosecute. But recently, with the latest amendment of the Act, Koren has the power now to prosecute erring members. And just what the process is this: if a member is found wanting rather, in the discharge of his duties or involved in any kind of professional misconduct, an investigation panel is set up, which investigates the causes and the process and everything, and then recommendations are made to the tribunal. So the Koren has a tribunal. That is also where a SAN, a senior advocate of Nigeria, is also present. And then such a person is tried at the tribunal, just like the court. I was a member of the tribunal recently, and two engineers were tried. Both of them structural engineers, one structural engineer, one civil engineer. And each one of them, having been found guilty, had his license suspended for 6 months.
What was the offense?
The professional misconduct. One of them what he did was, I think he went beyond his scope, because one of the ethics of the profession is that you only take up jobs that are relevant to you. You don't do anything that is outside your purview. And this particular guy acted as both consultant. He was the contractor. He was employed by the contractor, but he also did the job of consultant. That kind of thing. And then,
but many don't even know that that's an infraction. Many members of society don't
They do know. Engineers know that.
Do they get across to the Koren or NSC?
Koren has it. Once you are registered by Koren, you are given a copy of the Act. You are given a copy of the Code of Ethics and Practice.
So if a developer was to embark on a project and he reaches out to an engineer or something, what is supposed to certify that person? How does the developer know that this engineer is indeed certified to handle that job?
He would know. A developer should look for professionals to start with. If you have a job, it's your duty to search for relevant professionals in that area where you want to. It's like you want to employ somebody. You want to employ an engineer, or you want to employ a lawyer. You know the kind of person that you want, so you put up an advert or a bid, and then they come up. So that throws up the kind of professionals that you require, and then you interview them.
So is it a database for everybody where you can just go and type your search, the name of the person comes up?
Sure. And you even know whether the person has a current practicing license. That's also very important. Like these two people who were tried by the tribunal recently, they had the current practicing license suspended for 6 months, each one of them. And it could be heavier depending on the offense.
Was there ever a time that any engineer, I'm sorry, you're an engineer, so we're going to have to come hard on you.
Sure.
Is there been any time when an engineer was maybe prosecuted or indicted in such a case as a collapsed building in Nigeria?
So far, we haven't found one. So far.
Is that to say that engineers are exonerated from all the...
No, wait a minute. These two people that I told you about, actually, one of them, for one of them, or even both, for one of them, there was a collapse. A collapse was involved. It was an hotel that was being built in Kwara State, and then it's one side of the hotel collapsed, due to negligence, and the structural engineer on the project was found guilty. One
engineer out of all the collapsed buildings in Nigeria.
Well, you see, that is the problem. The issue is that in most of all these areas, the collapses, unless we find our members guilty, we couldn't try them. For these two people, for instance, we were sure. A panel of inquiry was set up, and they were found, and then they were recommended to the tribunal, and they were duly tried, and found guilty.
What kind of expectations do you have concerning the panel, or from the panel that's been set up by the state government? What kind of things do you suggest should be that the panel should be looking for?
Well, the panel, I'm glad that the panel is being chaired by town planner Toyin Ayinde. You know, he's a seasoned town planner and he's a former commissioner for, I think, urban development or environment. And what I expect is that the panel will come up with the reasons why it happened, starting from the structural design, the soil, because you know if you don't have, and then that's why the integrity test that Koren has recommended for the remaining, the two standing structure comes in. I'm sure that the government panel will also look into that, and they would. I believe that I have faith in the panel. So I'm sure that they will come up with recommendations on what happened, starting from structural design, the kind of materials that were used, the quality, and all of that.
So for those cases where people, you said they were tried and they didn't find anybody guilty, where certain buildings, or is it one part of the building collapsed, what kinds of people were culpable in that kind of scenario?
No, one of the structural engineer on the project was tried.
Okay, so in the cases where the engineers were, you know, not guilty of anything, who were the people that were culpable?
Well, actually, if we don't even find the engineers, the point now is that in some of those collapses, the engineers are not even involved at all. I mean, engineers who are registered engineers are not even involved at all.
So the ones that were masquerading were what, quacks?
Yes, we have a lot of that. We see, up till now, some people still would rather use the local bricklayers than professional engineers. And that's what we are preaching, and that's why we tell people because this is a loss of not just resources, but lives. So where all that is concerned, everybody needs to know that it is important that at every point in time, if you have a project like that, no matter how little, use professionals.
All right, thank you very much indeed, Margaret Oguntala, who is an engineer, is a fellow of Nigerian Society of Engineers as a result, also a fellow, Nigerian Institution of Environmental Engineers, Nigerian Society of Chemical Engineers, and Institute of Management Consultants. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you.
All right, let's take a look at some messages that's come through from you about what we did focus on today. We've got the first one coming through from Uzo about building collapse. He says there's no statutory provision anywhere which requires a structural engineer or indeed any other engineering consultant to report his clients to the government if he resigns as a result of his recommendations not being adhered to.
Well, I guess that's work for the panel. Well, Lauren Loba says about the Odili siege, criminal cartels doesn't seem to hold water for me. I think they're just trying to make someone take the fall. This is just a smokescreen, and they're not doing a good job of it. The judiciary must make sure it gets to the root of the matter, otherwise it would make a mockery of our judicial system.
Harry Tiamiyu, talking about the Odili siege, says many issues are attached to this matter beyond the arrest made so far. The magistrate had earlier made a claim that connected with what the lead suspect made yesterday, all pointing to someone in the present government. More so, to assemble all these people from different agencies together is not a mere coincidence. It must have been pre-planned. An independent investigation is needed. God bless Nigeria.
Well, Lewis Afolabi says, permit me to ask if the magistrate in the saga is real or fake. Was the affidavit real or fake? The conclusion of the police public relations officer, Mr. Frank, about that they are loose cannons appears very hasty. There are more to the saga than meets the eye. The bar and the bench must wake up to investigate this matter independently and bring out the big masquerade behind it.
Still on the matter, AGK says it's a welcome development that some suspects have been identified. However, the police must go deeper than this. The Honorable Justice Mary Odili is not just a random individual. Only persons with legitimate backing can go after her, in my opinion. So we are more interested in the orchestrators of that siege, and I strongly doubt whether these suspects have such powers.
We also have a few on the National Development Plan. Henry Okeke says, let's be practical in our planning. Each local government area in Nigeria must be able to own a functional farm as part of our National Development Plan. 774 local government farms in Nigeria will provide millions of jobs and an end to hunger.
Well, Abiodun says, jettisoning the economic plans of previous administration has really frustrated the economy. Recall the nation's economy took a downward trend from 2016 all through till now. It should be noted that government is a continuum. Move to alter continuity will yield hindrance to meaningful growth.
Marco?
Well, I know there are a few more. I see Nedum Ubaka here talking about federal government's national development plan. We also see Festus Akimboyewa saying the recently passed federal government's national development plan is good. But did it go through rigorous process of consultation? How many Nigerian organizations and individuals participated in developing the plan? Can federal government boldly say that the plan has been genuinely been informed by the generous and thoughtful engagement of a cross-section of Nigerians? The plan will just be another document if it fails to affect the lives of Nigerians positively on a daily basis. Well, it looked like a pretty nice place to end it. We have to thank you so much for watching this morning and your contributions throughout the week. Thank you for watching. I'm Maokwe Ogunyesef.
I'm Ayo Makinde. Stay safe.
Well, yeah, I'm Chamberlain. So remember, enjoy today, the weekend, and then we'll come back next week. We'll see you next time.